This is the Lian Li Lancool 207 digital, and this time we got a working one, so let's finally list all the things you can or cannot do inside of this puppy. Right off the bat, this is not exactly a new case. The Lancool 207 existed before, and originally there was a black and white version of it. For the digital subversion, however, we are currently limited to black only, but therefore we get this thing. This is a 6-inch LCD screen running at 60 Hz and at 720 by 1600 pixel resolution, while it's blasting at up to 500 nits. Now, on paper, this thing is great, and for the most part, I would agree. This is running using L-Connect 3, so you will get a little USB port which you will have to connect to your motherboard to get it running. However, if you don't have an old school USB 2.0 interior port left on your motherboard, for whatever reason, you will also get this little adapter here, giving you a regular exterior USB Type A port, and combined with the replacement PCIe bracket with a hole, you can route that to the back I/O of your motherboard. Not to say that this will be used by more than a dozen people worldwide, but it is cool that they've added this little workaround just in case. From there, it's L3, and to be honest, I do not mind. It was my first time controlling an actual screen using L3. Not to say that the mini screen thingies on Lian Li fans or AIOs aren't screens, but this is definitely another level of screen. Controlling every single detail was surprisingly easy. You can choose from a ton of templates or just start playing around with your own custom stuff and display. Yeah, pretty much everything you want. Everything from fan speed to CPU load, everything is in there, and compared to the shit show, let's say, of proprietary software I had to work with lately, this was a pleasure. Then there is this option that I did not expect. Secondary screen. Yes, you can toggle that, and boom, you've got the smallest and most useless screen sitting at the bottom of your case. Wanna watch a YouTube video on the side? Sure, why not? I get the systems port. It is, I find it incredibly cool to just have stats sitting right next to you. I'm all in for that type of stuff. The monitor function, although I think it's useless 99% of the screen's lifetime, I think it's cool that they've added the option. Not sure who needs it and for what, but there you go. Now, the screen as a whole, I think, is great, but not everything about it is great. And I'm not talking about the fact that my first sample came with a broken panel. Lian Li does seem to have a pretty good track record when it comes to replacing stuff, so I don't think there is an issue with that. My unit came out broken from the factory, as far as I can tell, so I guess if somebody else has that problem, as I did in the first episode with this thing, they will get it replaced. I don't see a reason to ring any bells there. No, what I'm talking about is, first and foremost, the quality of the screen itself. Do you remember these early on Samsung Galaxy phones, the first smartphones, with like that plastic feeling that when you touched it, it gave in a little bit? Yeah, that one is just like that. If you touch it, it wiggles. I mean, it's not a touch screen. Don't take it as a touch screen, don't touch it, you don't need to touch it. But damn, it feels plasticky. The viewing angle, on the other hand, I think is amazing. Like, I can watch it from like almost 90 degrees, and I can still see every number, every digit, everything. I can see it. That the viewing angle is absolutely amazing. Though I realized if you move your head around it, the color shifts for a bit, let's say. The color does change a little bit with the viewing angle, but the screen itself, the viewing angle is fine. You can still see everything. There is just like a weird effect if I turn around too much. Lastly, would be the position. Of course, everybody can do whatever the hell they want, but given that the screen is at the bottom of the case, I believe that fact makes this a desk standing case. A, because these are the screen's worst enemy, and I don't think that the screen can win that fight, and because otherwise you won't see it at all. I mean, if I have the case sitting next to me on the floor, I cannot see the screen, no matter how great the viewing angle is. Thankfully, the case is not big. What we got here is a 455 by 219 by 456 millimeter mid-tower with compatibility going through the roof. And yes, I did spend my first 5 minutes of this video talking about nothing but the screen, so maybe let's just break that pattern and talk about everything except the screen. On the left side of the case, we got a 4 millimeter thick tempered glass side panel, which is popped into place and removable by pulling on the rear of it. And speaking of pulling. Basically every panel on this case comes with the same level of quality and detail. The top popped and thick, the back popped and thick. The only exception would be this one here covering the PSU tunnel. This one is screwed in using 2 thumb screws. I do not know why they did that. Absolutely no clue, but yeah, 2 screws. But this one is also covering up another special thing about this case, because instead of going with a traditional layout, Lian Li decided to glue the PSU to the front of the case, immediately behind the monitor, which I'm still not allowed to talk about for the next 2 minutes at least. Now, doing this does create some restrictions, let's say, but also some possibilities. First and foremost, the absolute maximum of PSU length or depth, or however you want to call it, but it is 195mm, and that is with the cables included. So if you're going with whatever PSU you've got lying around, Lian Li says the limit is 160, and I fully agree. Stay below that, preferably even 150, like the minimum. If you don't want to do like severe cable stuffing, severe cable bending, because immediately behind the PSU you will get the back panel of the case, so you need to make that 90-degree bend. Oh, and yes, of course, there is a pre-run extension cable to get to that PSU, because the cable is now in the front here, and yeah, you need that. But what repositioning that PSU allowed Lian Li to do is lower down the motherboard as low as they could, as well as add these 2 pre-filled fan mounts. Out of the box, we'll find 2 all-black non-RGB 120mm fans in there, spinning at up to 1950 RPM while it's pushing up to 71.1 CFM and up to 1.99mm of H2O. And compared to pretty much every other implementation of PSU shroud fans I have seen until today, these are not useless at all. They've got a big-ass air pocket underneath them. They can breathe through either the left mesh panel, and in case that wasn't enough, you still got another mesh part on the back panel. Not as useful, but I mean, more mesh is better. And because they are lowered down, they aren't obstructing any motherboard PCIe or whatever ports. Controllable via 4-pin PWM, exchangeable if you don't like them, but you don't have to because they are pretty good, they do the job, and yeah, I really like them. Another side effect of this is more space above the motherboard without making the case higher, because they just lowered down the motherboard. The top part is pretty much the only space where the radiator would go if you were to go the water cooling route. There we can install an up to 360mm radiator that is up to 70mm thick until you start hitting the back fan spot. So an Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 with a 30mm fan is not a problem. Push-pulling it would be a problem though. Yeah, it would be a big-ass problem. Alternatively, you could also install a 280mm radiator in there, but for that one, there is another restriction that applies, because for my motherboard, for example, I would start to hit the VRM heatsink at about 65mm thickness, so your mileage may vary depending on the exact motherboard that you have. But now, where we're already talking about cooling in general, if you're not into AIOs, the top also supports up to 3 120 or 2 140mm fans, and the back can be filled with a 120mm fan. And in the front, behind this very easily removable mesh panel, very easily removable, mind you, I love the magnets. Behind that one, we will find the other very important out-of-the-box thing about this case. 2 pre-installed 30mm thick 140mm fans, up to 1800 RPM quick, 109.47 CFM and up to 2.71mm of H2O. Yes, they are pretty brutal and I love them. Technically, you could install a 280 rad in there, but it would need like the thinnest bottom border edge that I have ever seen. In the top, it's not that much of a problem. You got a little bit of space for the tubes, but in the bottom, like thin border. Otherwise, it won't fit. Or maybe you just don't do that because it's like a single radiator case. The top is for radiators. But before we dive into the airflow design of this thing, let's also quickly finish up the rest of the case. Motherboard-wise, we are looking at an up to regular ATX, although Lian Li really loves to write ATX in M80X size all over the place, but hey, they earned that one. The case is pretty small. The I/O is located at the top of the case and built into the front panel. Technically, that is like the old school cheap way of doing it, but as the front fans are fully accessible without the removal or any removal of the actual front panel, I have no problem with that. It's two USB 3.0 Type A's, a USB 3.1 Type C, a nice and clicky power button, and a 3.5mm jack. As for drives, we got supports for either two 3.5 or two 2.5-inch drives, both of which are supposed to go at the very bottom of the case, inside the PSU tunnel, and onto these brackets here. And as the PSU is on the other end of the case, having these does not create any meaningful restrictions. The only thing I could find is that they might restrict, partially at least, the bottom airflow or the bottom mesh, because if you take like 3.5-inch drives, it takes up a lot of space. So yeah, but also not enough to create any meaningful difference in performance. The case is standing relatively strong, the feet are rigid, and there is a little bit of rubber underneath, and the case is hovering at about 1 centimeter above the ground, which usually I would say like very, very bad, take 2 centimeters at least, but in this particular case it does not matter, because the only thing that breathes through the bottom is potentially a PSU, and also not always, we'll get to that. Which is also the reason why there is exactly one mesh filter included in the case, and it is removable from the front. Also great removal from the front, back sucks, front is better. Anyway, that one goes below that area. But everything else breathes either from the front or from the side, so it doesn't matter that there is not more than a centimeter underneath. Getting back to that PSU, the whole bottom breathing thing only applies to regular PSUs, not to the Lian Li Edge PSU series. If you get that one, you are pretty much forced to rotate it around and take the air from within the case, making bottom airflow just not existent at all. And then, as a good honorable mention, we got an integrated GPU anti-sag bracket. This piece of metal, which can be moved up or down and repositioned to one of the 3 other locations in case you have longer or shorter cards. Speaking of which, I almost forgot GPU length and width and CPU air cooler height. Yeah, let's do that. For GPUs, we can have up to 450mm long cards until we start hitting the 2 front fans. And in depth, it's about 175mm without the PCIe part, or the PCIe connector part. So no worries about any GPUs right now that are out. And the beloved NVIDIA Octopus, which I don't need to use because I got cable extensions and they look nice. Finally, a build that I've done without the Octopus. And by the way, there is also a set available from Lian Li that allows you to install the card vertically without removing the bottom fans, which is kind of cool. But it's optional and you will have to get it separately, just like a dust filter for the front fans. Not sure why you would want it, but you can have it. And for air coolers, we can go with up to 180mm high towers, which I think is also pretty fine for a case of this size. And now, with every feature of the case or every spec of the case covered, let's talk about how it was working with the case. Starting with cable management and the build itself. Installation of everything went as smooth as it could. We got the cable cutouts where we need them. The only visible one even got a rubber protection to make it look nicer. And I was very happy with the presence of cable holes behind the 2 fans, which are really big, including another giant slit where the GPU power cable should come out. And another little side effect about the lower down fans, or the lower down back part of the PSU tunnel, is you can't physically really see where the GPU power cable comes out. It just looks nice, it looks cleaner like this. And in theory, cable management inside the 207 digital is fine, with an asterisk. In the back, we got about 3 centimeters worth of space for the area where there is no motherboard. And starting where the PSU is sitting and ending at the usual CPU 8-pin position. And that space paired with these Velcro strips gives you pretty much all you need. And I was even able to squeeze in cable extensions for every single cable I used. So I had to do some amount of cable stuffing. So I can say cable stuffing is something that you are able to do. The point where the asterisk comes in to play is with the GPU power cable, because I was using the colored extension over here, which required me to use 4 PCIe 8-pin plugs and then just adapt them over to the NVIDIA one. And all of these PCIe power connectors were sitting right below the bottom fans. And these motherfuckers constantly found their way into these goddamn fans. Now, here I want to add, if you just use the regular NVIDIA power plug to NVIDIA power plug, which comes included with the Lian Li Edge PSU, that will not be a problem for you. There will be no adapting happening right where the fans are. However, I had to learn it the hard way. The complete backside here, that is forbidden for cable stuffing. If it does, bad things are going to happen, but this does lead me to a thing I think Lian Li should have improved before shipping out the case. I think the bottom fans should have some sort of protection underneath them. You know, one of these 15 cents AliExpress things that you just slap on the fan that doesn't restrict airflow too much. Other than that, I can't really nag. Using the edge PSU in here just makes sense. The cables are coming out at a 90-degree angle, so closing the right side panel will be as easy as it gets, except if you use like cable extensions, then it gets quite a bit harder, but the edge PSU makes sense. So cable management as a whole, I think it's very much okay to great. Just use the NVIDIA to NVIDIA plug. Don't come with adapters, that will create bad things. And now finally coming to the airflow design of the Lancool 207 Digital. As Lian Li calls it, optimal, and I do agree. Almost. The system we built in here is a 9950 X3D paired with a 4080. I left all of the original fans in there, and there was just a Endorphi back fan added next to the Lian Li Galahad 2 Lite in 360 in the top. To give you some overall numbers, at 200 watts package power running CPU burner from Firmark, the CPU was sitting at 76.3 degrees C, which is a very fantastic result, and the GPU was hitting close to 66 degrees C, running Firmark in 1080p all-in, which is like by a degree lower than the lowest I have seen that GPU run in any case until now. So as a build, this whole thing here works flawlessly, but I'm more interested in how the air goes in and out of the case. If there are any buildups, if something is like stuck somewhere, and no, the smoke passes fantastically. All the mesh panels are minimally restrictive, and compared to all the other cases we had so far where there was mesh in the bottom and fans below the GPU, this is by far the best working implementation. Like in that Montec Sky case, for example, it helped, but this cools. And you can see how the smoke is being sucked in there and how it is being pushed into the GPU, helping it to get to that 66 degrees. And the front panel as well, no buildup whatsoever. The smoke goes in, goes through whatever it is supposed to go, and then out in the top or in the back. Cooling wise, very, very impressive case. The build as a whole works perfectly fine. I'm happy with how it performs, but the case definitely helped here. And now let's get to my asterisks. The PSU location. No idea how Lian Li came up with this image, because it does not quite work like this. The PSU is here, and even if you get a normal PSU and you turn it around to get the cold air from the bottom, there will always be hot air exiting this area. That's how PSUs are built. No matter what you get, hot air is getting out, so let's add that red arrow there. And unfortunately, I did find that if your GPU or the fans below the GPU are running fast enough, they will to some degree suck in the hot air or the exhaust air coming from here. That will happen, which will inevitably lead to some degree of hot air recycling. Don't get me wrong, it's not a lot. And in the benchmarks we've done, it wasn't even close enough to make this overall build perform bad, but some degree of recycling is happening, and that is unfortunate. And what about build quality? Yes, and simultaneously no. The overall structure is rigid. The glass is thick and strong. I love the pop mechanic, great implementation. All the mesh panels feel great and are strong. The mainboard part and the PSU tunnel part don't wiggle too much if you apply force. Single front panel connector. The glass panel has additional vibration absorption, like the foam protective thing going around, and so on and so forth. So they did a lot of very positive work here. But not everything is that great. The back part of the case, that one is just like pretty weak, even if you got stuff in there. I mean, it's like 99% really big honeycomb hole, so there is just not enough material to make it strong. But for example, my original unit, the one with the broken screen, came already with a slightly deformed back part leading to a small gap next to the motherboard I/O. And don't get me even started on the broken screen. So overall, I would say the build quality is good, not like Be Quiet or Fantex good, but good. I would say slightly above a Montec case in 2025, because they improved, like hella improved, but it's higher than that. But you can see that some corners were cut, but considering the price, I totally get it. Right now and here, I can get a 207 digital for just below 120 euros. And to be frank, I think that's an amazing price tag. I'm not saying the case is perfect, but the cooling is absolutely great. The build quality is more than enough for the price tag, but most of all, and now I can finally get back to it, there is a full-blown screen in the front, a screen that can show off everything that you want, every stat that you want, and your actual windows. And to get that screen into the 120 euros price tag, that's impressive. And before we start wrapping up this video, I got another thing that I just don't get. Having that screen in the bottom does make this a desk-standing case, in my opinion. Yours might differ, but good luck with your screen's worst enemy. And with that, I think that having the front I/O at the top of the case makes like 0 sense. Especially because there is more than enough leftover plastic around the screen. And if you ask me, Lian Li should have modified the 207 digital even more to the point where they relocate the I/O just next to the screen, which would make so much more sense if you got it sitting next to your face anyway. Just plug it in, plug it out, start the PC, that would make sense. No, I have to stand up, press the button, plug in a USB drive, and then sit down again. But hey, I'm just the guy that likes to watch smoke go in and out of the case. So as for me, I can definitely recommend this case. Sure, it has its flaws. Some things could have been slightly better or slightly stronger, let's say. But considering the raw performance, the possibilities using the screen, and the compatibility of pretty much everything you could even imagine in 2025, absolute recommendation, especially with that 120 euro price tag. Just keep in mind that I wouldn't call this a ready-to-go case. The included fans are really nice, and you will have some sound samples coming in a minute, but you will need any type of exhaust fan, be it in form of an AIO and or at least the 120mm fan in the back. Like if you use an air cooler, just at least get the 120mm back fan exhaust. That would be like basically minimum. And now to give you some idea of how loud these original fans are, or the whole build is. But okay, this should be everything for the Lian Li Lancool 207 digital, and at this point a huge thank you to Lian Li for sending it over. Oh, on a side note, we have a Discord server, so if you want to join, the link is down below. And we got channel membership, so if you are planning to sell your soul for an OG poop emoji, that's one way to go. But if not, I'm also releasing the content to all members 2 or 3 weeks in advance. Except for the NDA stuff, because, you know, I don't want to get sued. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but will also serve to bury my original Lancool 207 digital. No idea what happened with the screen in the factory, but that poor sucker saw some things. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you want to continue, have a look at our take on the new Arctic Liquid Freezer 3 Pro in 360, which didn't turn out that pro as I wanted to be, but yeah, that's it. Hope to see you on the next one. Bye bye.